My name is Parker, and what I'm about to share comes straight from the heart. One of the most humiliating things that can happen to a man is being struck by another man, especially in front of his own family. That's not just a blow to the face. It's an assault on your dignity, your pride, and everything you believe you are as a husband and a father. And if you stand there and do nothing, people start to see you differently, as weak, as someone they can walk over. I know this because I came dangerously close to living that reality. My wife's lover once raised his hand to hit me, in front of her and our young son. But before that hand could land, I made sure he'd never forget the consequences of trying. But if you think this is just a story about a slap, think again. It runs much deeper. This is a story about betrayal, pride, survival, and reclaiming the space life tried to steal from me. Let me take you back to how it all began. 6 years ago, I married Naomi. I was 28 then. She was 25. We were young, in love, and completely swept up in our own little world. I still remember standing at the altar thinking, this is it. Life doesn't get better than this. Naomi was everything I had ever hoped for in a partner, and the future looked bright. Not long after our wedding, Naomi found out she was pregnant. It wasn't exactly part of the plan, but we were thrilled. We took it as a sign, a blessing. Our family had begun. Once our son was born, Naomi chose to stay home full-time to raise him. Those first 2 years, she poured her whole self into being a mother. It wasn't easy, but she made it look effortless. She loved that boy with every ounce of her being, and I did everything I could to support her. At the time, I had a stable job in the corporate world. It paid well, enough to cover the bills and still give us some comfort. Life felt steady, balanced. When our son turned 2, Naomi decided she was ready to go back to work. With a degree in education, she quickly landed a teaching position. I was proud of her. I knew she needed more than just diapers and dishes. She needed purpose beyond the 4 walls of our home. And with both of us working, our financial situation improved. We weren't wealthy, but for the first time, we could breathe a little easier. Looking back, those were the golden years. We would lie in bed at night and talk about the future, a bigger house, maybe even a second child someday. We felt like a team, like we could handle anything. But life is a cool way of testing that kind of confidence. The company I'd worked at for years was bought out. At first, we were optimistic. The new management talked about innovation, growth, and expansion. But what followed was a storm of layoffs, reshuffling, and cold-hearted decisions made in boardrooms. When the dust settled, I was out of a job. I'd always been the dependable one, the provider. Suddenly, I was waking up every morning to silence. No callbacks, no interviews, just rejection and a growing sense of failure. But I didn't have the luxury of sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I signed up to drive for a ride-hailing app. One day I was in meetings wearing a blazer, and the next, I was driving strangers through traffic, just trying to make enough for gas and groceries. On top of that, I decided to chase a long-held dream. I wanted to run my own online store. I dove headfirst into the world of dropshipping. I bought courses, built a slick website, and stocked it with products I thought would fly off the shelves. They didn't. The expensive courses were filled with recycled advice I could have gotten on YouTube. Every time I thought I had found the formula, it collapsed. I was bleeding money we didn't have, and all I got in return was more stress, more disappointment. It started to feel like I was cursed, like nothing I touched would ever work out. It wasn't just my bank account that was empty. I was emotionally drained, completely worn down. And that's when things between Naomi and me started to unravel. At first, she held on. She stayed patient through the job loss, the failed business, the constant uncertainty. But patience has an expiration date. Gradually, she started letting her frustration show. Not outright accusations, but snide remarks when bills were due or when something around the house needed fixing. Her voice said what her words didn't. I was becoming a weight she was tired of carrying. I understood where she was coming from. She was shouldering more than her share, and it was clearly exhausting her. But I wasn't slacking off. I wasn't sitting around waiting for life to fix itself. I was trying. Hard. But trying doesn't always equal progress. And when your efforts don't bear fruit, it chips away at you. You start to doubt yourself. You go quiet. Our conversations turned cold and mechanical, mostly about money, the house, or our son's school. Any warmth between us had faded, even in the bedroom. It was like living with a stranger. The only thing that kept me grounded was my son. No matter how bad things got, the sound of him calling me Dad with an innocent smile reminded me why I was still fighting. He gave me purpose when everything else was falling apart. But while I clung to being a father, Naomi was changing in ways I couldn't quite make sense of. She started staying out late more often, never offering a reason. Sometimes she wouldn't even tell me she was leaving. When I asked where she'd been, her replies were ice cold. "Why do you care?" Or "That's none of your business." The signs were right in front of me, but I refused to believe what they pointed to. I told myself she was just stressed, that maybe she needed space. I assumed things would go back to normal once I got on my feet. Looking back, I see now that I was blind. I was so focused on fixing the finances, repairing my pride, keeping the house together, that I didn't realize my marriage was already crumbling from the inside. Then one day, everything changed. My car, already giving me trouble for weeks, finally gave out. I had no choice but to tow it to the mechanic. After dropping it off, I walked home. Our son was still at school, and for once, the silence in the house felt like a break. I sat down, staring at the bills, wondering how to stretch the little money we had left. That's when I heard a car pulling into the driveway. I looked through the window, and my blood ran cold. Naomi was in the passenger seat of a silver sedan. A man I didn't recognize was behind the wheel. She stepped out first and walked toward the door, then turned back, motioning for him to come in. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but her body language said it all. He shook his head, clearly in a hurry, and then he walked up to her, grabbed her by the waist, and kissed her. Not a polite goodbye. A full kiss. On my driveway. He smirked afterward and told her something that made her laugh like a schoolgirl. She giggled, and turned back toward the house. I stood there, frozen behind the curtain, watching a nightmare unfold in real time. My mind rejected it, but my eyes couldn't deny it. When she finally came through the door, I was waiting, arms folded, face expressionless. Her smile vanished. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. She knew. She knew I saw it all. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at her and asked, calmly, "How long has this been going on?" She blinked, feigned confusion, pretended like she didn't understand. I didn't flinch. "How long have you been sleeping with him, Naomi?" And just like that, the mask dropped. She stopped pretending. Her voice rose. She got defensive, accused me of being controlling, of trying to police her life. She flipped the narrative like I was the one in the wrong, like I had no right to ask questions. I couldn't even respond. The pain was too sharp, too raw. So I turned and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. In the days that followed, she made no effort to hide her affair. It was like she'd given up pretending. She came and went as she pleased, offering no explanations and no apologies. Sometimes she didn't even bother answering my questions at all. She believed she had all the power now. After all, she was the one with the job, the steady income, and she knew I didn't have the financial strength to push back. Worse, she used our son as leverage, never directly, but with subtle, threatening undertones. Like if I made too much noise or tried to stand up for myself, she'd take him from me, drag me through court, leave me penniless and alone. And for a while, it worked. I bit my tongue, kept the peace, swallowed my pride. But inside, I was boiling, dying a slow death, watching her parade around like I didn't exist, under the same roof where we once built a life together. It was unbearable. Something in me knew I couldn't let this continue. I needed to act, not just for me, but for my son. So I called a divorce attorney. That phone call shifted everything. I laid it all out. Her affair, her emotional neglect, her threats. The attorney listened closely and then gave me advice that changed the game. File first, and file in Tennessee. Tennessee allows fault-based divorces, which means infidelity can legally be cited as a reason for the marriage falling apart. It might sound like a technicality, But when it comes to custody battles, especially when you're the underdog financially, it can make all the difference. The lawyer told me that if I filed first and could prove her infidelity and emotional abuse, the court would take it into account when deciding custody. I didn't hesitate. I gave the green light, and within weeks, the paperwork was ready. I was no longer reacting. I was making the first move. My next step was to prepare for the custody battle. I wasn't trying to hurt Naomi out of revenge. I just knew our son deserved better than to grow up around strange men walking in and out of his mother's life. He needed stability, something she clearly couldn't give him anymore. With my lawyer's help, we filed the divorce quietly in Tennessee. I didn't say a word to Naomi. Then came the day that proved I made the right choice. I was home, spending time with my son, when I heard tires crunching on the driveway again. I peeked through the curtain. There she was, Naomi, stepping out of that same silver sedan, laughing and leaning into the driver's window, smiling, carefree. I stepped outside and stood on the porch, waiting for her to make her way up the steps. The man who had dropped her off lingered near his car, watching like he wanted to see how far he could push the situation. As Naomi approached, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "What you're doing isn't just hurtful, it's wrong. Bringing another man here, to our home, you're setting the worst kind of example." She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just rolled her eyes like I was some irrelevant background noise interrupting her day. Before I could get another word out, the guy took a few bold steps toward me. I turned his way and said, "This doesn't concern you. Stay off my property." He chuckled, and what came out of his mouth next is something I'll never forget. "This won't be your property once she divorces you." That flipped a switch in me. I stared him down and said what I knew to be true. "You're a homewrecker, a coward, inserting yourself into another man's family like it's some game. You think that makes you special? It makes you pathetic." He must have taken offense, because the next thing I knew, his hand lifted like he was going to hit me. But I was ready. The moment he moved, I caught his wrist midday, pulled him forward, and twisted his arm behind his back hard enough to send a clear message: "Don't ever try that again." He cried out instantly, screaming in pain, shouting for me to let go. Naomi started yelling too, rushing toward us like I was the one out of line. "Stop! You're hurting him!" she shouted, frantic, like she was more concerned about him than her own husband. I didn't let go until he was begging. When I finally released his arm, he collapsed to the ground, clutching it and groaning. Naomi dropped to her knees beside him, already on her phone calling for an ambulance, all while throwing me a glare like I had just committed some unforgivable crime. I looked at them both, her cradling him like a wounded lover, and I said clearly, for anyone listening, "This marriage is done." The paramedics arrived not long after. They loaded him into the ambulance, and Naomi climbed in right beside him. She didn't come home that night. The next morning, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the divorce papers on the table. There was nothing left to wait for, nothing left to fix. Staying in that house would only drag me and my son down with it. So I packed a few essentials, woke up my boy, and we left. We drove back to Tennessee, back to where I grew up, back to the people who still had my back. My parents welcomed us with open arms. That first night, I didn't just sleep, I rested. No tossing, no turning, no dread in my chest. The next morning, I turned on my phone. 8 to 9 missed calls, all from Naomi. I didn't need to guess what had set off a panic. She must have walked into that empty house, seen the car gone, and found those divorce papers lying on the table like a final goodbye. With the filing now official, I made my next move. I sued the man she cheated with. Tennessee has a law called alienation of affection. It allows you to hold someone legally accountable for intentionally interfering in a marriage. I had evidence, texts, photos, timelines, and I wasn't bluffing. He probably thought it was a joke, until the summons arrived at his doorstep. At the same time, the custody case began. Naomi tried to flip the story. She painted me as emotionally distant, claimed I'd checked out during the hardest parts of our marriage. She tried to frame me as an unreliable father, but what she didn't know was I came prepared. In the end, the court saw through the noise. I was granted temporary custody while the divorce and final custody hearing moved forward. Naomi was livid, but I didn't care about revenge. I cared about my son. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally stepping up, not just surviving, but protecting what mattered most. Moving back to Tennessee was one of those decisions you don't realize you needed until after you make it. There were no more whispered arguments, no cold silences, no tiptoeing around tension. The air felt lighter. My parents were incredible. My son had cousins to run around with, uncles to give him advice, and grandparents who showered him with love. It was a kind of support system every kid deserves, and something Naomi could no longer offer. And for me, I started healing. No more daily jabs. No more walking on eggshells. I could breathe. I started eating better, sleeping deeper. I was becoming someone my son could be proud of again, not the worn-out version of myself I used to be. To anyone reading this who's going through something similar, whether it's betrayal, divorce, or a brutal custody fight, I want you to hear me clearly. Stand your ground. Don't let anyone make you feel weak for loving too hard or for staying too long. And definitely don't let them make you feel like a failure for finally choosing peace. Especially if the person who broke your heart was the one who promised to protect it. If you've been through something like this, or you're in it right now, drop a comment. Share your experience. Offer advice to someone else who might be feeling lost in the middle of their storm. Your story might be the light someone else needs. Thanks for hearing mine. Until next time, stay strong and protect your peace.